friends, and welcome to Smartloving Conversations, the place where we discuss all things Catholic marriage. I'm Francine Parola.
And I'm Laura Kane from Smartloving, a global network that accompanies couples as we together explore how to maximise the good times and learn from the bad ones.
With our guests, we explore love, marriage, family, and living the Catholic faith, setting our sights on heaven while keeping our feet on the ground, or in the mud and muck that life throws our way. We've been there, and so have our guests.
Join us for better and for worse as we dive deep into real-life conversations of struggle and triumph.
Welcome, friends and listeners of Radio Maria Australia. Our Smart Loving Conversation today is about thoughts, emotions, and needs.
But first, we want to introduce our guest, Monica Elias. Monica has been married to Paul for 7 years, and they live in Albury with their 3 children. She is a Catholic life coach and is passionate about helping women to be who God made them to be and setting Australia ablaze. She has degrees in mathematics, theology, and education. Monica is sure to always have a few good books and podcasts on the go. Welcome, Monica.
Thanks so much, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you join us, Monica. Monica also, with her husband, was part of a recent course that we ran for the marriage kit. So it's nice to be collaborating with you and remotely with your husband as well, even though he's not physically present with us.
Yeah, he's holding the fort up there.
God bless him. We need husbands to do that sometimes for us too.
Well, before we get into the topic, I just wanted to ask, how was your walk with the Lord these past days?
Well, I was just thinking before we started about this, we had Miriam and Father Sam Randall from Radio Maria Australia stay with us overnight. And after we did our recording this morning, we had a little home mass. And when we got to the part where we say that prayer before we receive the Eucharist of, Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you under my roof, and say the word and I shall be healed. And it was just that under my roof, which is part of the New English translation, it just hit me like a ton of the roof. Like we were literally under my roof. The Lord has come in under my roof. And it just was this kind of moment of just, wow, I have to process that a little bit. So that's like in the last couple of hours.
That's awesome. I've never had mass in my house. That's going to be on my to-do list.
Yeah, well,
on the bucket list.
We haven't had mass here for ages. I've received communion like when we've been sick, and Byron's brought communion home for me from the parish mass. But it was just struck me this time.
Yeah. And what about you, Monica? How has your walk with the Lord been these past few days?
Well, this whole month I've been really trying to get off my phone, like break what really is an addiction. And so I set myself the challenge to journal about it every single day with the Metanoia Catholic Journal. And it sort of really turned into like more of a, where is my focus going? Where is my attention going, like across the board through the whole day? And there's just been a lot of things about that have been really challenging and surprising, and like, ooh, I'm like so rebellious at the idea of not being in control of what I choose to do and what I choose to think about. And that's where I'm at.
Those habits are so powerful, but it's so freeing when we do break them too.
I might have a chat with you offline about that too. I need to disconnect from my phone. Yeah, I've just recently, the last couple of days, really been comforted and boosted by the prayers of others. I had to go into hospital for a little operation, and it's always a little bit scary when you're under anaesthetic. And so I was just felt really calm knowing that I had a whole load of people praying for me. So the power of prayer, it really is amazing. So let's get into the topic.
Yes. Yeah. Thoughts, emotions, and needs. So I guess this is a really good follow-on from our last podcast, number 4, on communication. So I just want to springboard off that by recalling that we started that by looking at the different levels of communication. So they were, firstly, the 5 levels. 1 was cliche, number 2, data or facts, 3, opinion or thoughts, 4, emotions, 5, needs or spiritual desires. And the deeper the level is, the more we reveal about ourselves. So this is all just a bit of a recap. And that's where the intimate communication really happens, is those sort of deeper levels of particularly 4 and 5. And so we're always encouraging couples to focus at the levels of emotions and needs. So we want to explore these deeper levels in a little bit more detail, and in particular look at how they interact, especially how thoughts interact with emotions and how emotions interact with needs, because they don't really stand as kind of siloed, separate levels that we just kind of flip into one or the other. They do kind of cross over a little bit. So we will start, if you like, going backwards. We're going to start at level 5 and work backwards. So firstly, just looking at needs, one of the most famous psychological models was put forward by Abraham Maslow. I think it was in the 1930s or 1940s. And he talked about the hierarchy of needs. And you've probably seen this. If you've done any psychology at all, you will have seen it. It's sort of usually pictured as a pyramid with survival needs, which are primarily physical at the base of the pyramid, and then going up to the peak at the top with emotional and spiritual needs that are sort of really more about human flourishing. So at the base level, the most basic is the physiological things like air, water, food and sleep, homeostasis. Then the next level up is safety needs, things like shelter, clothes, protection from danger. The third level is sort of social needs, belonging, love and affection. Fourth level is esteem, from ourselves and from others. And the fifth level is self-actualization. So a bit of a mouthful, but you're really trying to get at achieving the individual potential. And it's got a number of dimensions. There's cognitive, aesthetic, morality, creativity. And so there's this, hierarchy of needs. And the idea is that if we don't have those most basic needs met, it's really hard to focus on the others and to achieve the others. So, I mean, that sort of makes sense. If you're running out of air, you really only care about where do I find air. You're not even going to be, you don't care whether someone's giving you a hug or enough of affirmation, or it's kind of secondary. You just need to get those basics. And we know that also, if anybody who's worked in schools and education, if kids are coming in and they haven't had breakfast, it's really hard for them to learn. So a lot of school programs now put in place breakfast for kids in situations where they're not getting sufficient nutrition. So the basic levels can't be ignored. If if we want to start hitting those higher level needs, we need to make sure that the others are being met. I do want to talk just for a minute before we just kind of open it up for discussion, though, is the place of desire. And this is something that I guess I'm still trying to get my head around a little bit. We kind of understand that a need is sort of fundamental, like it's not something we choose, whereas we think about desire more as like a want, and it's not considered essential to survival. But if you looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'd kind of say, well, getting esteem from self or others, that's not essential for survival, but it is essential for flourishing. And so there's this kind of area of a bit of not flexibility, but just muddiness, perhaps, of where does one stop and the other start in Catholic anthropology. So that's just a big word to talk about what is the understanding of the human person from the Catholic theology. We as human beings, we're created by a loving God for love and called to eternity with God. And so the desires of the heart, the deepest longings of the spirit, are in some ways placed there by God, and they're really powerful and they drive our choices. And so God places those desires in us to ultimately lead us to Him. And I'm immediately thinking of, the story in the Gospels of the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman who's had 6 husbands, and she meets Christ at the well. And we know that she's a social outcast because it's the middle of the day. And she says, give me this living water, that Jesus is the fulfillment of all the desire. She's been trying to meet her desires in husband after husband after husband, or man after man after man. But no human man can ever fulfill her, because her desire, it's an infinite desire for an infinite God, and only Christ can fill it. So in some ways, it's a holy desire. And what gets us into trouble is when we misdirect it. We experience this sense of desire, this longing in our hearts for an infinite love, but we try to satisfy it with finite things, whether it's using people, whether it's things. This is the source of a lot of addictive behavior and so on. We make idols of people and of things. And that's a real misdirection of our desire. So that's a pretty fast race through it, but I just want to pause and kind of open it up and get your input and feedback to kind of put a bit of flesh on it for our listeners.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've been watching with my husband Joe War and Peace, the BBC rendition, a TV show, and everything that you just said, the story of Russia in the 1800s, and it's all about desires of the heart and the longing, people's deepest longing of the spirit, and what you were saying, like how powerful they are and how they drive choices. So the character I'm just thinking of when you said that, Fran, was Natasha Rostova, and she's played by Lily James in the episodes that I'm watching. And she's this energetic, romantic, creative type, and she's just looking for love. She's a young woman just, coming to herself. She wants to get married. That's the desire in her heart. And she's just meeting these men in Russian society, but no one's really sweeping her off her feet until she meets Prince Andrei, who's this handsome war hero, but he's also a widower and he's a little bit older than her. And he already has a child from a previous marriage. His previous wife passed away in childbirth. So they start seriously dating, but his father doesn't approve of Natasha's family. So he asks his son, the prince, to delay the marriage for a year to test their love. And Natasha hasn't really been given the whole story. She's a bit confused. They were so in love and they were seriously dating. And why does she have to wait a whole year? She agrees to do it, but just at the end of the 12 months, she has been getting a little bit of she's not being reassured from her fiance of his love and that he's going to come back. And she meets his family and gets a bit of a cold reception. And so this all is perfect, the perfect drama when she goes to the opera and she meets a Prince Anatole at the opera who wants to seduce her. He likes what he sees in her, and she desperately wants that love and that need. And when she doesn't feel like she's getting it from her fiance, she almost ruins herself by making the really poor decision of eloping with Prince Anatole, who she knows nothing about and who actually turns out to be a real scoundrel. So that is like a perfect example of misdirected desire, and then emotions and the needs and what you were talking about, esteem and belonging, social belonging, love and affection. It all ticks it off perfectly in that War and Peace through that character and through many other characters and subplots of the novel.
And it's amazing how these art forms, because many of them are, whether it's a good movie or a book or whatever, can, I guess, illustrate some of these ideas so brilliantly for us in a way that kind of communicates into the heart in a way that the theory sometimes has trouble penetrating.
Yes.
Monica, what about you? Have you got any insights to share?
I found this, I've been really kind of pondering the relationship between these three things over the last few days, and like, how does it all like fit together? Because there's that tension between like, what is exactly a need? Like, how do I know? Like, is this really a need or not? What's really interesting is that the etymology of the word need is from, like, the root word is like danger or death. And so that's a pretty clear one. If it's like, death is imminent. If this need is not met, then okay, definitely a need. But then there's also like the slow interior death, which is, I think, what the not flourishing is. And so like we see that with like those studies that they've done with babies who like had affection withheld from them, and they basically had failure to thrive.
Those Romanian orphans that were just left in cots for some of them died, and if they survived, they had really severe developmental disabilities.
It's heartbreaking. And what I think's also interesting is that it's that highest level of communication was expressing our needs, like places we feel like there's something lacking. And the reason it's so vulnerable is because our spouse, in the context of marriage, but it could be anybody, but like that other person is free to say, no, I can't do that, or I'm not willing to, or they just forget. And so we're opening ourselves up to the possibility of being wounded and feeling disappointed or feeling rejected. What's really interesting is that at that point, even if you could say objectively a need hasn't been met and my spouse does have certain obligations to me because they've made that commitment, the way that we then choose to think about that and the feelings that come from that are completely within our responsibility. So if we allow that to fester into resentment and we don't take our thoughts and emotions about that to the Lord, then and it starts to play out in not good ways, like ultimately then we're not loving our spouse and not meeting their needs, ironically. So I just found there was this really interesting there's a number of different things playing together.
And that's a really good segue, I think, into the next little bit, which is looking more at emotions. And look, a basic working definition on emotions that we've used for years, and it maybe could be improved on, but it's a spontaneous interior reaction to some kind of trigger, whether that's a person, a place, a situation, event, or a memory. So something that happens or what we perceive happening. Emotion, interestingly, has the same Latin roots as the word motivate or move. And so emotions, in a way, are intended to motivate us to action. So they can be pleasant or unpleasant. And obviously, that drives behavior either towards or away. And I think a really interesting, just a little aside, is that we sometimes use the word feelings, but in the scientific literature or the psychological literature, feelings technically relates to a bodily sensation. So if we talk about nauseous, or my hands felt sweaty. In common language, we call emotions feelings when we're talking about, I guess, a psychological reaction, sensation or experience, but technically it's in the psychological literature, they do differentiate between what is a physical sensation or physical symptom versus a psychological symptom.
That's interesting that in a scientific way they like separate those two, but as Catholics I think we're very like, we are a body soul composite, and there's this really mysterious unity of body and soul that goes on. And so I think there's that, like, our emotions come from a thought, and so there's that movement from the immaterial, our mind and our soul, which is then connected to our material brain, and then that creates that the physical, the feelings, like the feelings and the emotions go together. Like there are physical sensations that you can notice that go along with emotions. So I think when it's all kind of united in that way, it's sort of, it respects that, the way that God made us.
Yeah, there's that sort of integration approach, which is really important. So just thinking in terms of emotions, there's lots of different models. I'm thinking of Paul Ekman or Parrow, who have an emotional framework that identifies 6 basic primary emotions. There's slight differences between them. But they'll all, whatever model you use, they'll identify shades or variations in intensity. So, for example, if you're looking at joyful, you can be pleased, which is a mild version of joyful, or you can be ecstatic, which is a more intense version of it. Some of them identify dyads, so combination between the two. Like, for example, if we feel shocked, we might say that's a combination of surprise and fear. Other models have 8 categories, like Plutchik. But whatever the model is, point is there's lots of them. There's lots of emotions, and even there could be differences in the languages and things like that as well. That some languages have words for emotions that we don't have an equivalent in English, for example. So and one of the things that I did notice when I was picking references up on this is that there are some very culturally specific ones. Like I came across this idea of going postal was in one of the lists of emotions. Like, what's going postal? And it turns out it means being extremely or uncontrollably angry to the point of violence, usually at one's workplace. And it emerged out of newspaper reports in the United States, where they were reporting on, over the course of 20 years, 2 decades, a string of murders in the workplace out of frustration amongst American postal workers. Now, it was something like 40 over 2 decades. It's probably not that many, given how many people probably work in the US Postal Service. But that became, you going postal, that's what that meant. And it just made me think about, our own Australian context and some of the things that we might say to describe emotions that could be fairly unique to the Australian context. So I just wanted to, for fun, ladies, if you had any thoughts or were guilty perhaps of using some Australian sort of slang terms to describe emotional states.
I love a good Australian idiom. I'm just thinking, don't carry on like a pork chop.
Yeah, right. I would have thought that came from the English, actually, but maybe
probably
it is Aussie. But yeah, you're right.
It probably does come from, we've probably inherited it from our English roots. What's another one? Don't chuck a wobbly.
Yeah, my granddaughters were doing that yesterday.
And then don't get your knickers in a knot if you're getting stressed. That's a good one.
My parents and grandparents, I think I hear them use this quite often, ropeable. And I just love that, like, just such a visual of, like, you're so angry that someone probably needs to tie you up with a rope and hold you back.
Yeah, I've often used cactus, like, I'm so tired, I'm cactus. And it's like, I don't know why a cactus is tired, but maybe because it's in the desert or something. I don't know. But that's a common one that I've used, cactus. And gobsmacked, I often use gobsmacked, which sort of, I don't know, I mean, gob is a mouth. I mean, I'm not even sure. Yeah, I'm gobsmacked. I'm so shocked. I mean, I don't know how that works with the mouth, but yeah.
I guess because
I can't close my gob.
It's like you're opening your mouth in shock, and that you put a gobstopper in it. I don't know if that's where it comes from, but that's what I'm thinking. So let's hold that thought. I want to unpack this a bit more after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're listening to Smart Loving Conversations on Radio Maria Australia.
Our topic today is thoughts, emotions, and needs. And we've been discussing emotions and needs, and now we want to explore how those two things interrelate with each other. So, emotions firstly interact with needs. When we have a need, whether we are conscious of it or not, we will experience a pleasant emotion if it's being met and an unpleasant emotion if it's unmet. And that tends to be a really good way to, I guess, get a good indication of what needs is to sort of take the pulse on what of our emotions are feeling like. If they're pleasant or unpleasant, that's usually telling us needs are being met or unmet. And emotions, because they're much easier to identify, they're a really good way to use them as a kind of a window and to get clues into the underlying need, because it's sometimes really hard to sort of identify the need. They're like the window onto our needs, but it's not always an obvious connection. So emotions in some ways are like symptoms. They're kind of like the things that come up into the surface of our consciousness that are indicators of an underlying reality. So we've always encouraged couples to make a habit of daily reflection on their strongest emotion. And it's not just about having something meaningful to then share with their spouse, but also to grow in that self-awareness, that kind of discipline of that habit helps us to know ourselves a little bit better, recognize when our needs are being frustrated or met in our relationship or in our life. So, for example, sometimes I might be working on a blog and I feel hungry. So I take a break to get a snack, but it's not actually a need for food. It's a need for something to distract me from my frustration because I'm having trouble writing. So it's like this a superficial and a deeper need, or possibly even a fake need and a real need, if you like. And part of the discipline of regular reflection is that we start to get better at drawing the lines between a real authentic need and one that's perhaps a misdirect or the difference between an emotion and our needs. It just helps us understand better what's going on inside. Monica, you've got some really good training on
Okay,
this, so why
I have
don't
a
you
lot
go?
of.
Go ahead.
I wanted to say just with the difference between a fake need and a real need. So our emotions come from our thoughts. So whenever there's an emotion, like our emotions are exactly that, they're symptoms or signals as to what is going on in our interior life. And it's really just our Lord like knocking on the door of our heart, being like, hey, there's like something to look at here. There's maybe like something that's not true, because that's another thing we want to be careful of. Like, is this a real need, or is this just a preference, or even a very strong preference? Or maybe it's like, so for example, maybe your husband doesn't do something you ask him to do. He forgets to do the dishes or something like that. And then you have the thought, he doesn't really care about me. Your real need isn't to just have the dishes done. It's to process that thought and that feeling of being unloved, and to talk it through with your husband and communicate how you feel and your need to be loved. And our Lord just wants to hold that idea up to the light and say, well, what's the truth here? Maybe it's just that you have a very strong preference that he loves you right now by doing the dishes, but is it a real need per se that the dishes get done? Maybe not. So I think that's just a helpful distinction to make. And then the other thing I wanted to say was taking a break to get a snack. So we call this buffering in the coaching world, and it's what we do to try and avoid our uncomfortable feelings. Our brains they're wired according to the motivational triad. So this is to avoid pain and seek pleasure, to avoid risk and stay safe, and to do things in the most efficient way possible. And so this is a lot of the work that I do with my clients. It's to bring awareness to all of the ways that we are ignoring our real needs, which most of the time is probably just to process the painful thoughts and emotions that are going on, and to actually discern, is this a need or not? And is there somewhere that is there an unrealistic expectation that I have for someone else to provide that need to me? Or maybe I'm supposed to be looking to God. And that's the irony of it, is that's not really loving, to expect them to give something that they can't give.
So interesting, Monica, to just go back to this idea is that we're often not very aware of what our deepest, authentic, eternal needs are. They can be, I guess, disguised behind ephemeral needs where we think, I'm feeling really hungry. And we can convince ourselves that we're feeling really hungry, even though we just had a lunch an hour ago and our body clearly doesn't need food.
Mm-hmm.
But psychologically or emotionally, we've convinced ourselves that that hunger is there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, these can become habits. Like it's a coping mechanism, and it's like, well, the brain wants, like, we want to feel better. We don't like to feel restless or uncomfortable or disappointed or whatever. And so our brain's like, okay, what's the quickest way that I can get a dopamine hit, whether it's social media, some kind of distraction, online shopping, just daydreaming, getting some food, all of those
Procrastination's
things.
big one for me. Yeah, very true.
Well, what you were saying, Monica, about, if you ask your husband to do the dishes and then he doesn't, and then you're equating that to he doesn't love me, it spirals into something bigger as opposed to he forgot or got busy. I've got a couple stories that highlights emotions and needs. A couple we know, the wife regularly has like a daily diet Coke from McDonald's, which lasts her the whole day. So she doesn't drink coffee at all. So that's her caffeine fix, and it gets her through like a demanding job. So she prefers to get her diet Coke from like a fountain, so from the McDonald's fountain, because you know how soda from a fountain's a little bit less bubbly. It's got a different taste, right? So that's her thing, her little habit. So they were on holiday, and the husband was driving, and on the way home from a lovely, day out with the kids, and he didn't want to stop for her daily diet Coke in the afternoon. They were going to the shops afterwards to fill up for food. So he said to her, "Look, I don't want to stop at McDonald's. It's a little bit out of the way, but I'll get you a normal diet Coke from the shops." So she was swallowing her annoyance and upset about this. And I guess there were several layers going on in terms of emotions, needs, and as we were discussing. So one was the caffeine in the diet drink, which was a habit. Also caffeine, as we all know. We've all probably got a bit of a caffeine addiction. So also I think not being in control, as she wasn't the one driving. So her usual schedule, she had to rely on the husband. He was at the wheel, and they're on holiday. So schedule and habits were out of whack. But I think there was also a deeper spiritual need there, and it was feeling appreciated and loved, because she gives up a lot, bends her schedule for the husband and the kids. So there was an underlying question of, do you love me enough to do this inconvenient thing for me? There was no real pressure, time pressure or a deadline, because they were on holiday. It just wasn't convenient, and the husband thought he had his own idea of what should be done, the best way to get the Diet Coke. So yeah, working through that as a couple, as you were suggesting, Fran, at the end of the day, if they had said to each other, what was your strongest emotion of the day? And then, the wife says, "Well, I was annoyed. You didn't get me a Diet Coke from McDonald's." And then he would respond back, "Well, I got you another type of Coke, from the shops." She says back, "Well, that's not what I wanted. I wanted what I normally have. It's different. It tastes different, blah, blah, blah." I often get what you ask for because I love you. And as a wife, that's my way of showing you love. So when you didn't follow through with what I asked, I didn't feel loved or appreciated. Rather than just swallow it, get on with the day, annoyed, that builds up that tension, and that what you're saying is exactly right. If you can, this is the emotion I'm feeling. Let's go deeper. What did it mean for my emotions, my needs, and my deeper longings? It's so fascinating.
So much more than just the taste of the damn Coke, right?
Yeah.
It's got layers of meaning. Yeah.
Multi-layered.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just sort of moving it on to the next idea, which kind of just keeps taking it a little bit deeper, just thinking now about thoughts. And our thoughts often get expressed as opinions and beliefs. As if you like, it's the meaning that we associate with an objective fact, so something that we perceive. Interpretation can be influenced by all sorts of filters: our history, our associations, our expectations, and so on. So, for example, if I get up and I open the front door in the morning, there's a paper on the lawn, depending on my expectations or history, that could mean lots of different things. If I know we've taken out a subscription, the paper means, good, it's been delivered. Yeah, high five. If we haven't taken out a subscription, the paper on the lawn, I could interpret that in any number of ways. Oh my gosh, it's the neighbour's paper. I wonder which one it is. Oh, somebody's just dumping their rubbish on my lawn, annoyance. There can be all sorts of, it's the same objective fact, but I can have a different interpretation and draw a different meaning from it depending on all of those filters, and that will trigger obviously different emotional response. So it might be true or it might not be true, or even just partially true. The point is that how we think about or interpret what we perceive, that event or trigger, once it passes through the filter, we get that interpretational thought, and that gets the emotional reaction. And it's just kind of, I think, really important to recognize how important our thinking is on terms of our emotions. And Monica, I really want to throw this open to you because I know it's such a basic key idea of the Metanoia Catholic mindset practice. So I want you to use your language from the Metanoia Catholic to kind of build this idea out for our audience.
I might just go through the model that we use with our clients. So you have, just really quickly, the circumstances, facts, things that happen external to you, or maybe sometimes it could be internal, but pretty much they have to be something that's like verifiable in a court of law. So objective reality. Then there's our subjective interpretation, as you said, Fran. And I was intrigued by that example that you gave, Laura, because as a mindset coach, I'm like thinking of all the questions that I would ask that wife, and like she decided her narrative was going to be, he doesn't love me, I feel unappreciated, and like I don't feel loved. But like her emotions are her responsibility. Like that interpretation of what happened, like objective fact is she didn't get the drink, her favorite drink. And so the narratives that we tell ourselves about what's happening are everything, because she could have had a different interpretation. She could have still spoken about it with the husband later, but she probably could have saved herself a lot of like angst through the rest of the day. So that was just very interesting to me as a mindset coach. Anyway, so we have our interpretation, which then creates our feelings, and our emotions drive then our actions. So the way that we then show up to our spouse, to our family, the virtues or vices, the things that we avoid doing, the way that we are going about our life interiorly, whether we're overthinking, ruminating on the past, beating ourselves up, the negative self-talk, all of that. And all of that ultimately creates the results that we have in our life. And what's really interesting is that the words of our thoughts are made flesh, or are incarnated in our life, in our results, through that, like, because our thoughts, we feel our thoughts as emotions, and then they fuel our actions, and that creates all the results that we have in our life. So that's just super interesting. So maybe you're thinking that it's bad news that we choose our thoughts, because then it's like, then all my like emotional pain is my fault in a way. But what I want to offer is that is actually like such great news. It is so freeing to be able to go to your spouse and say, I would like you to do this. I have this request to make. I have this need that needs to be met. But to be okay with being disappointed, like letting him freely choose to honor that request or not. Like love isn't love unless it's free. And so we could go down the I'm going to manipulate, guilt trip, passive aggressive kind of thing to get what I want. But if you can just say, well, maybe I'll feel disappointed, but like it's an emotion and I can handle it, and I can take responsibility for that and take it to the Lord and process it. Like that is just so freeing.
Agree. Yeah. The freedom is and it's also mature. It's part of our growth in holiness, isn't it? That we take that, instead of just being blown about like a fly in a mixed master, to use an old cliche, there is that sense of, well, we can make choices here, and they're mature choices. It helps us to grow in virtue.
And just also that understanding of like what's inside our control and what's outside our control. So there's that serenity prayer, which I love. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's exactly the work that we do as mindset coaches. It's learning to surrender and be at peace with the things that are outside our control, learning to have the courage to take responsibility, no matter how uncomfortable it is, for what's going on interiorly, and then to have the wisdom to actually recognize the difference between the two.
Yeah, it's a beautiful prayer. And of course, it seems so influential, particularly in people who are on 12-step programs recovering from some form of addiction. It's such a insightful prayer for sort of human well-being. Look, before we take a break, I just wanted to touch on one particular type of thinking that we do, and that's the self-talk, if you like, which is a silent thought. It's a thought process, and it's a category of thoughts that they're on voice, but they're profoundly influential on our interior well-being and behaviour. The person I talk to most is actually myself. I'm having a conversation with myself for hours every day, and sometimes, if I'm honest, I'm not very nice to myself. And if my mother knew what I say to myself sometimes, she would probably tell me to stop hanging around with myself, because I'm a bad influence. And so I'm conscious that I'm often kinder to others than I am to myself. And that's kind of got fairly significant consequences on my interior life. So, ladies, what are some of the negative messages that have been part of your self-talk, and how did you reset, or how are you working towards resetting those?
I have for a long time had this recurring thought that I don't have a valuable contribution to make, and that's held me back from contributing to like just a conversation with like a very small group of people. So the fact that I am on a podcast right now, that's just evidence for you all that mindset coaching does amazing things.
Go girl.
But what's really interesting is there are a couple of questions that I'll ask clients pretty often, which is, what is the tone of that thought? And is that how God would speak to you? Because so many of our thoughts have this like critical, aggressive, harsh, judgmental kind of tone. And it's like, that's not what our Lord, how he would speak to us. On myself, I've been working a lot on like having compassion with myself and just being okay with where I am and seeing myself as a person to be loved and not a problem to be solved, because I get very easily into like, okay, achieve a goal, move on to the next thing, solve the next problem. And yeah, a lot of us, I think, are trying to, most of our negative self-talk is trying to beat ourselves up to better. We're trying to like, we think, oh, if I just tell myself I'm terrible, then I'll be motivated to improve in this area that I know I need to improve in, but it doesn't work.
And ironically, perfectionists and high achievers are more vulnerable to this than other groups. I think that I mean, and there's a lot of people who it's probably a good proportion of the population fit into high achiever type perfectionist personalities, but it is one of the real danger points, I think.
Let's take a break before we get practical with a take home for our listeners.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Smartloving Conversations on Radio Maria Australia.
We've been talking about thoughts, emotions, and needs and how they interact. And now it's time to get practical. Theory is great, but how do we take these ideas and put them into practice in our marriages, families, and at work?
So our practical take home today is what I've called the advanced daily strongest emotion. So it's it's the basic daily strongest emotion that we talked about in last session, but with a bit of a twist. So just to recap, the basic daily strongest emotion is just each day take a few minutes to reflect on the question, what is my most significant emotion today? And then to take turns to share your answers with your spouse. When we want to take that to next level, if you like, and to advance it, we've got 3 tips for you based on our content today. Firstly, to go deeper, don't just think about the emotion, but also the thoughts and the needs that relate to it. So really kind of explore it in detail, both above and below, if you're thinking about the different levels of communication, to get a full kind of excavation, if you like, or an analysis of that emotion and where it's coming from and what it's leading to and how it's influenced by our thoughts. Secondly is to reflect in writing. Writing tips us into a different neurological process and it helps us to go deeper. And a really valuable thing is it also gives us a record that we can then look back on and see the development of our self-awareness. So even in the space of a couple of weeks, you can sometimes track, oh, this thing happened a couple of weeks ago, but then I reacted this way. This time, with this daily habit of reflection, I'm now reacting in a much more mature way. And thirdly is to share it with God, not just a spouse. And this is a profound and very effective way of praying. It's real prayer. And I mean, we can bring God into the process of reflection right up at the beginning, but even if you just think about how much it does for our relationship as a couple to share in that really personal way about things, the most significant thing that's happening to me in the day, just think about just take that conversation into a conversation with God. That's how we build intimacy with our spouse. It's also a way to build intimacy with the Lord. So, ladies, what are your thoughts and experience with this?
Oh, I have to tell you, like taking emotions into my prayer has just been such a game changer. It's just deepened my communication and intimacy with him so much. And that really, as I said earlier, I think is the real function and purpose of our emotions. They're those signals as to what we're thinking and an invitation from him to look at parts of our heart where we need his love and his truth. And a really powerful question can be, especially if we're grappling with a difficult emotion, to say, Lord, where did you experience this emotion? That can be quite beautiful. And my favorite tool for this is the Metanoia Catholic Journal. If you're interested to try that out, it's a free download on their website. I use it almost every day, and it takes you through these 7 exercises. So there's no like big blank page that people can find a bit intimidating sometimes. There's all these prompts, and they have all these like different things to help you use it, but it just really helps you to slow down your thinking, because that model that I took you through earlier, so circumstances, thoughts, feelings, actions, results, like that happens like that, like in a split second. And so we often will use the language like, you made me feel angry, but we've forgotten that there's a thought actually that happened. And so journaling just really slows that process down and helps you become aware of it. And yeah, I never cease to be amazed when I am just going about my life and I'm like, oh my goodness, I've noticed this thought, whereas in the past I would have just reacted. But it slows down that space, and you thereby become more free, because you're able to choose intentionally what you're going to think, feel, and do.
And even if you're doing that after the event, after the fact, it's training us to, I guess, recognize patterns, because, we are creatures of habit. So, and some of those patterns are triggered all the time, but it's training us to recognize that. And it's also, inviting us into change into that space. So it's, I was just listening to think, people will be thinking, yeah, but it happens in a split second. How do I slow it down when I'm not even aware of moving through those transitions? You don't have to necessarily do it in the moment. Going back and analysing it later
journal,
is...
no, that's a good point. Yeah, it takes time, but like it's so worth it. And it's also like changed the way that I share my emotions with my husband. So I'll try and say, when you did this, keep it as factual as possible. I had the thought, like I'll say, this is how I interpreted it, and then that made me feel this way. So it's not he made me feel that way, but I'm also sharing, well, this is the perception that I had of it. And so that's just inviting him to then go, oh, well, that's not true. Or, oh, okay, yes, I understand that would be painful if that's what you thought, which, yeah. And also I find if I have something really difficult to communicate with him, I'll really try and do my work on this first, so that I come prepared with, okay, I've already processed it. I'm really ready to, I'm responsible, and I'm also detached from the outcome. Like I'm ready to love him unconditionally. So if he like gets upset, then I'm not going to suddenly get upset as well.
That's really good, Monica. And that's such a gift to your relationship, to be able to, it's really taking ownership of our own emotions, because we're owning the thoughts that happen between what happened. And it's not to say, our spouse might do something that is objectively dreadful. Yeah, he might say something cruel, for example. And so it's not unreasonable to have a thought around, he doesn't love me, he wants to punish me, or whatever it is, based on that objective kind of thing. But it's also, I think what this process helps us do is to recognize that, well, if he said something cruel, what might he's acting out of an emotional response, what might be his circumstances and his background? Because it's just not in our nature, I think, as human beings to be cruel. Our instinct, we're created in the image and likeness of God, so our instinct is always towards love and kindness and generosity and truthfulness and so on. So it's when we deviate from it, it's usually because there's a whole lot of other stuff happening in our lives. And it's not to say that we're not responsible for our actions, we are, but I think putting that big broader context into what we perceive to be a really genuinely hurtful thing, or an accidentally hurtful thing, just helps.
Well, just to paint like a different vision of like imagine if you could respond instead of automatically going, well, I'm hurt. What if it was like a place of curiosity and like, well, I wonder, like, why is he doing that? Why is he feeling like that? What's he thinking? How can I like be extravagant in my love right now? How can I be really unconditional in my love? How can I love him even when he does whatever it might be? And of course we still have boundaries and all that kind of thing. But yeah, that we always, I guess the point is like you can choose what you think. It doesn't mean you have to choose Pollyanna happy all the time, but you look at the fruits and say, well, are the fruits of this thought helpful? Is it leading me to God? Is it leading me to virtue? That's always the key question.
Really good. Laura, did you have anything you wanted to add into this?
I think you guys have covered it. My only notes were, journaling is so profound and important, and saying, God, my most significant emotion of the day was this. Thank you for my life. Thank you for this challenge I've been faced. Show me how you're making me holy through this trial, or thank you so much for this period of joy in my life, depending on what season you are in life. Just writing it down and just, reflecting is beautiful and way to go deeper with the Lord.
Right, we're coming to the end of our time. We've had so much content this time, a little bit more than we anticipated. So we're going to jump straight now to sharing our blessings with you so that we can wrap up in the hour.
Monica, let's start with you first, your blessing. Tell listeners about your coaching, because we are sure it is a great blessing to your clients.
Oh, thank you. Well, they seem to think so, which is very nice. So I work with my clients for 3 months, and so far they've all actually wanted to keep on going. And we work on things like their self-talk, their relationship with failure, understanding and processing their emotions, on seeing our emotions as signals to what thoughts are going on under the surface, why they're getting their current results, decision making, how to take responsibility, all of that stuff. And I see them every week for 12 weeks. And when you start to learn to manage your mind, it cleans up so much of the unnecessary drama that we often create for ourselves, and the buffering behaviors, wasting time on social media and eating things we don't need to, and all of that stuff. And so it actually pretty much gives you 2 hours of your day back, which is amazing. So if you've been trying to work on a goal or a habit of some kind of change in your life for a while and it hasn't been working, or maybe you feel like you've got too many things to work on and you don't even know where to start, and so you've been putting off starting, reach out to me and I'm more than happy to set aside an hour to talk to you and figure out why it's not working, why it feels so hard, and whether I'd be able to help. Even if you don't decide to pursue coaching, you'll at least have a new understanding of what you need to work on in your interior life, rather than just focusing on the actions, which is what we pretty much all try and do. And if you do different actions with the same thoughts, you'll still end up getting the same results. It's just not going to work out for you. And I also have a couple of free resources, which we'll have the link for, but I have a workshop on how to stop overthinking and up-level your decision-making, which is a little worksheet that I use all the time to help me get out of indecision and procrastination and just to discern choices wisely. So, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And we all love some freebies. We'll make sure those are easily found in the show notes. Thanks for that, Monica. And look, it's been really great having your wisdom with us on this topic particularly. You've really brought a lot of depth and nuance to it. And I had the privilege of, we shared a workshop hosting on the Theology of the Body Summit last year with Matt Ingold, one of the founders of Mindset Catholic, and that was really, really great. They're a wonderful couple, can highly recommend the Metanoia Catholic as a resource.
Just for context, because I don't know if we explained this, but they do training for Catholic coaches. So that's who I've done training with.
Excellent. So they weren't going to be my blessing, but we will put their links, a link to Metanoia Catholic as well, in the show notes. My blessing was actually just an audio book that I listened to recently called Oil and Marble by, I think, a Stephanie Story. And it's a story of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. It's sort of in 5 years, they had sort of crossover in Florence. And I went searching for it because we've just recently been to Italy, and we spent about 5 days in Florence, and I knew I'd be going to see some of the artwork. It just gave me such a beautiful insight. I mean, there's a lot of creative license in it, but the book just gave me some beautiful insight into the spirituality and the theology, particularly of Michelangelo and his work of David. So it just, when I finally went to see it, it was just such a beautiful thing to kind of know that, Michelangelo had spent 2 years basically sleeping and living at the foot of this block of stone and praying and listening. He had this thing about the figures in his stone. He just needed to release them from the stone, that he didn't design them or create them, that they were already pre-existent in the stone, and he just had to listen. And really what he was doing, he was listening for the word of the Lord to guide him in. And it's just, anyway, I could talk on and on about Michelangelo's David, but I won't do that. But I highly recommend the book Oil and Marble. We'll put a link in the show notes for people.
Thanks, Fran. Well, my blessing for this podcast is War and Peace, that I mentioned previously we'd been watching. It's the BBC series version of it. Just the morals, ethics, the themes of forgiveness, redemption, desires and needs throughout the Tolstoy's novel, and then obviously they made it into a television series. It's just brought so many. We've had some great conversations, Joe, my husband, and I, about the different characters and oh, that led him to do that, and that led her to do this, and oh, if only this hadn't have happened. And then it's all, of course, in the era of Russia in the 1800s and Napoleon invading Russia. So just with the Queen's death recently as well, I've been thinking in eras and periods of world history. So to just go back and watch War and Peace, and focus on an era, it was interesting.
I read War and Peace, the book, in paper.
It's a good effort.
Years ago when I was a teenager, I think, but to be honest, I can't remember any of it. So it might be time to go back to it, or maybe I'll watch the series. It sounds great.
Yeah, I've got a new one for my list.
Yeah. So, ladies and listeners, that brings us to the end of our time together. You can find more information, including links to our blessings and show notes and more, at smartloving.org/conversations. That's www.smartloving.org/conversations. We're Francine Parola and Laura Kane from Smart Loving, with special thanks to our guest, Monica Elias. It's been great having you with us. Thank you so much, Monica. And we pray that you will be blessed in your walk with the Lord today, and we lift you up in all your intentions to our patron saints, Our Lady Undoer of Knots. Pray for us. St. John Paul II, pray for us. This is Radio Maria Australia. Goodbye.